Flower friends, happy Wednesday and happy day before Thanksgiving. It's your friend in flowers, Lisa Mason Ziegler, and really happy to be here with you today because we're having a great time here today at the Gardener's Workshop. Suzanne and I are here together. We're by ourselves, which is when we're most productive, right? Or actually, Andrew was here this morning building leaf mold cages. But we're just we're slaying a lot of dragons, and that always makes me happy. And isn't that great to do that the day before a holiday? So I have 4 days, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, where I don't have to work, but I always find something to do. But anyway, it's a really great feeling. If you've never joined me here for Ask a Flower Farmer, this is how it works. For the next 30 minutes, I will do my best to try to answer your questions. And if you have a question you want to submit, put it down in the bubble with the question mark. That way I don't lose it in all the comments here. So right at the bottom of your screen, there's a bubble with a question mark. Just go in there and type your question, and I will get to those in just a minute here. So several things to share. First off, our entire website and phone app stores, with the exception of courses, is on sale, 20% off, y'all. That is everything. That is books, tools, supplies, everything, y'all. Why supplies last? Because we will sell out of stuff. There's no question about that. This is always the biggest weekend of the year, and I'm just saying to you, you ought to shop today for those things that you know you want, and it's in the app and it's on the store, and you don't have to use a promotion code. They're all priced as marked. And this morning, as I was showing off our leaf mold cages being built with Andrew, and I wanted to get the link of my book, Vegetables Love Flowers, and it shows the price, the sale price. Oh my gosh, it's like $20. Just great gifts. You could build the great gardener or flower farmer kits, by buying different products and putting them together. And, we only sell those same tools, seeds, and supplies that I use on my farm. That's kind of our niche. We don't just sell a bunch of stuff. We just sell the same stuff that I use here. So really cool stuff. So check that out. And secondly, guess what I harvested today? Sunflowers. Check this out. Literally, Suzanne and I just made a video for my club. So if you're one of my club members, remember there is no sewing circle today. So we made a little video. How beautiful. I mean, these are just cracking, right? But look at these guys. So these were cut just like 30 minutes ago. I just cut them. This is last week's harvest. There's peach, and that's the bouquet mix. And from the field, y'all remember I have no hooper greenhouses, right? So the Sewing Circle and I start those sunflowers every Wednesday together inside my membership. And this would be the last week. Well, there's actually still a few left out there, but we're going down in the 20s, so I'm pretty sure we'll see. I'm doing an experiment. But people just do not push sunflowers to the limits that they need to. And so remember, team, if you're a membership person, that we do not have Sewing Circle today. But I posted a video in there just minutes before I came on here of the harvesting of these sunflowers and just give you some tips. And so be sure you go over there and check that out. All right, friends. So I see we have a couple of questions. So I just want to add also that while a lot of people, especially people that aren't flower farmers, that are maybe thinking of being a flower farmer or wondering, think, what in the world do you do all winter? Well, let me just say that real flower farmers that are really got their businesses up and running know that they're as busy in the winter as they are the rest of the year. We just aren't harvesting flowers. It's when we're not harvesting, we're attending to a whole bunch of other requirements for being in business, right? And so don't let this time get away from you. I know for me, I am really a procrastinator once the harvest stops. And I can really easy all of a sudden wake up one day and think, oh my gosh, where'd the time go? I haven't even done X, Y, and Z. You know, for me, that's filling my freezer, that's laying out my big calendar for the year, amongst a whole, getting our tool sheds back in order and doing our buying and just so many things. And it's like I can really easy. So I'm saying to you, for me, I take the month of December off there's usually no seedlings here. I'm the person that takes care of seedlings. Usually there's no seedlings going on. There's nobody coming to the farm to work. I'm in charge of anything that needs to be done. And that just allows me, and I try to tackle many of those things I just mentioned. And then so in January, I can lay on the couch for 2 weeks and watch old movies if that's what I want to do, right? So don't let this time get away from you. And if you're in boot camp with me, we are cracking the whip about that kind of stuff. So I'm your kick in the pants when you need it. All right, friends, let's see what your questions are here. When I plant my eucalyptus, since I have room, can I plant them straight into the large blocks rather than having to transplant them up? So that's a frequent question I get from people wondering. Because so for instance, like not very many plants that I actually bump up from the small to the large. Eucalyptus is one. Tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants are the others that I can just think of. I'm thinking there's one other, but I can't remember what it is. Anyway, the problem is if you plant that little seed, whether it's a eucalyptus or a tomato seed, in that big 2-inch block, you face the same problems and struggles that we used to struggle with when we were planting in big plug trays or cell packs. And you just don't have as good germination. It's very difficult to keep a large mass of soil equally or evenly warm and moist. And that's why people have trouble with germination. But when it's the small block, it's so much easier to do. So that's why, and not to mention the space savviness of the small block, like on your heat mat, those type of things. So yes, you need, I start in the small block and bump it up. It's not that big piece of labor. And usually, I'm only starting about 40 or 50, maybe eucalyptus of each variety. And so it's not that really big of a deal, but that's why I do that. Let's see. I understand that even though sunflowers are warm season tender annuals, correct, they will tolerate fairly cool temperatures, yes, as opposed to, say, basil. Is each type of flower, cool flowers or warm flowers, on a scale of cold tolerance? So Jen, I think I understand what you're asking. You're wondering if there's other plants like sunflowers. So what she's speaking of is that we have learned through the sunflowers, first off, are an enormous cash crop when we were in full production. Literally, I paid for a $32,000 tractor and implements by 1 year's rotation of sunflowers. And it's so easy to do. It's all about weekly successions and starting early and going late and having them every single week. What really ramped up my game, so we were already doing the successions every week, but then I can remember walking in my garden one day, probably in March, which is my last frost date's mid-April, right? I'm walking in my garden and I see some reseeded sunflowers because we grow sometimes, used to be back in the old days. I grew a lot of branching sunflowers for the birds. They are not good cut flowers, but they reseed because we leave them for the birds, right? And seeds would drop. Well, I found some reseeded, it was actually Moulin Rouges, reseeded sunflowers in my garden. And it's like, oh my goodness, it's like a month before my last frost date, and these are like sprouting and growing out here in my garden. Good grief, if nature is telling me to do it, I'm going to do it. So that's what got me to starting. I actually start sunflowers to plant out 6 weeks before my last frost date. Those are the gamble. I'm not going to go into the details. I talk about that when we're doing early bird sunflowers. But I learned that while sunflowers are warm season tender annuals, they are tolerant of cool to cold weather. Now, keep in mind that when I do plant early like that, I am row covering them because if you want them to grow, I don't want them to just survive. I want them to actually grow, right? And so that's what she's asking. Are there others? And I have not found that to be true. I've not had anybody else hit me right between the eyes with an obvious piece of proof like those sunflowers did. And the other side of that coin is cool season hardy annuals, which tolerate heat. And even though it's flipped, they still appreciate being planted at the proper time, but they bloom during heat. For instance, look at Lysianthus. Cool start, hot finish is what we call them. They want to be planted into cool to cold soil. They're a cool season hardy annual, but they bloom in July when it's the highest heat that we have. And straw flowers are kind of that way too. So I don't know that there are any others that qualify for what I've done with sunflower. First off, sunflowers are such an in-demand crop in all markets that we sold across. So it was worth investigating. Most other flowers, people, they come and go, as their seasonality is. But sunflowers definitely have a place whenever we can have them. We knew that we could sell them. I mean, we had florists take 10 or 20 bunches a week. That's a lot of money, y'all, to have the icing on your cake, right? So sunflowers were worth that little investigation. Ann Stokes, can you talk about the heirloom mums you used to grow and how you did it with no hoop house? When do you plant them and what's the care for them along the growing time and any resources to purchase them? Do they start from plugs? All right, Ann, if you see smoke coming out of my ears, that was a long time ago. Let me think for a minute. So, first off, I don't have any hoop houses. And I did grow heirloom mums. So I think I can't even remember where it was, Ann, if it was at boot camp or in the club or wherever we were. We were talking about late season flowers to go along with ornamental cut flower kale. And I mentioned heirloom mums because I used to grow them. And the problem that I faced was there just wasn't enough flower diversity that I could grow out in the field to make it worth keeping my business up and open in the harvest mode, meaning help, buckets out, just the whole process. Anyway, so I did buy plugs. You definitely have to buy plants. You don't, I think you can actually buy rooted cuttings nowadays. I don't pay much attention. I know that there's several people out there that sell them. But I didn't grow any of the fancy mums, those ones that you see with the really big heads and all those petals out in the field. That just did not really work. I grew more of the smaller, I'm going to call them a button, but I'm not sure that's the right term. The smaller blooms that were in clusters, kind of. And also really paying attention to when the mums bloom. I forget how they describe them. I don't know if it's as simple as early, mid, and late. To get those that are early or mid, the late ones, typically a frost would hit, But nowadays, we still haven't had a hard frost. Here it is Thanksgiving, right? So I bought in plugs. Back then, I know the people that I bought from were King's mums, but I think they've since been sold. But I know that there are a lot of other people. There's farmers out there now that I know that Harmony Harvest and I think Three Porch Farm in Georgia. Those are friends Steve and Mandy. And of course, Jessica is Harmony Harvest. But again, I have not looked into, I'm not talking about growing those fancy mums out in the field. I think just like anemones and ranunculus, it's not the real growing soil part. It's the blooms getting wet and all that kind of business. And mums get tall. Ours were really tall. So that's the thing. And then they need to be pinched if you want to have a lot of branching. And so I just hardly even remember all of that. But the thing that I just encourage you to think of, and these are the things that I just didn't know about when I was kind of figuring out what to sell and where to sell it and how to do it and all that stuff. Sometimes there's things you could grow, but is it worth it for you to grow? Meaning super early and super late crops. Like you could sell 1,000 sunflowers by themselves. You don't have to have anything else to go with them, right? You could sell sunflower bunches. Or if you're selling to florists, they'll buy them all. They'll buy them all, y'all. This time of the year, I mean, the sunflower is fall, right? But when you start growing, like for instance, I stopped growing Iceland poppies as far as a commercial crop because they bloomed so early on my farm, which sounded like such a great thing, right? But I didn't have other flowers to go with it. And that meant that we had to start up our harvesting and getting out all of our harvest stuff earlier while we were big time seed starting, big time building beds, big time planting the first warm season tender annuals, and it just interfered. So keep all that in mind. So not everything works out. You know, one of the business people that I follow, it just helps me so perspective wise, y'all, to read other people, what they've gone through. So this is a really big business person that I learned so much from. And she said, you know, to make my first $1 million, I lost 10,000. To make my first 5 million, you know, I blew $50,000. Talking about mistakes they made and wrong turns. And I know when I bought those mums, I really felt like I had screwed up and spent money, and I tried so hard to make it go, but I should have just cut my losses. And I'm just saying that, but so you can try it. Any tips for caring for flower bulbs in the ground over winter? Daffodils, tulips, and ranunculus. So I can't help you with ranunculus at all. I grew them once 20 years ago, and it was a total disaster, and I don't even remember what I did or how I did it. But daffodils and tulips are two totally different animals. Daffodils perennialize. You know, those are where you plant those where they can stay forever, and they come back every year if you make them happy. And I know that Dave Dowling in his course, it seems to me that he talks about how after the foliage dies down in spring, you know, you wait like 4 months, you never cut the foliage of this year, this coming spring, that foliage that's there is what makes the flower for the next year. So you never cut the foliage off. Then that takes like 4 months for it to die down. But he talks about how they cover the daffodil beds with silage tarps to prevent weeds for a certain period of time. I can't even remember when it is, but there's a lot of different techniques. It's all about, are they in your landscape or are you growing, you know, huge beds of daffodils? Tulips are a whole different animal. They're annuals, even though people like to think that they're perennial. They don't perennial. They will perennialize, but the flowers aren't worth it. Not as a cut flower farmer. You buy new bulbs every year, and you have to be sure you're buying the right varieties for tall stems. They have to be planted. You have to you either buy pre-chilled bulbs if you don't have deep winters. And I would recommend the No-Till Flowers podcast, Jenny Love's podcast. She and Dave Dowling did an amazing podcast on growing tulips, whether you should or shouldn't. It's hard to make money on tulips, especially if you don't know what you're doing. You'll just spend a lot of money on bulbs. But check that out. Best books or resources for starting seeds. Well, you have to know that I have 3 books. Each one of them talks about starting seeds. So we're going to go with that. But I have a great online course called Seed Starting Made Easy. I think it's $30. It's about 120 minutes long. It's broke up into a bunch of segments. I take you from beginning to end to starting seeds with soil blocking. It takes you through direct sowing seeds out in the garden. I show you how to sow sunflowers in plug trays. And I even have added in starting using the commercial soil blocker, the Swift blocker. So you can find that over at thegardenersworkshop.com. And you know, I guess the big difference between my teaching and others people is because I'm dyslexic, I can't digest a lot of smoke, a lot of words, a lot of fluff. It's like just get to the bottom line, and that's what I tend to do, and that's the way that I teach. And so if that's what you're looking for, there are sections in each one of my books, Cool Flowers, Vegetables Love Flowers, and Cut Flower Handbook on seed starting. But the course is a really great compliment to any of those to actually see it done and taking you through. I mean, telling you the pitfalls, why you have to do the things you do, right? So check that out. My seed starting room is about 70 to 72 degrees. Is that too warm? Do you use a fan to cool? So your air temperature of your grow room is 100% based on which family of flowers you're starting. When I'm starting warm season tender annuals, it's 80 to 95 degrees in there. And when I'm starting cool season hardy annuals, it really depends, 65 to 72 or 73 degrees. So if you're using a seedling heat mat, which I recommend, I use, and it's the type that has a built-in thermostat, which means it's driven, the temperature of the mat is driven by the air temperature. Cool season hardy annuals need a seedling heat mat with warmth, but they don't need it hot. So if your room is too warm, like say 70 degrees, that's going to make your heat mat go to like 85 degrees. And that's a little too warm. So while I'm in the sprouting mode in my grow room for cool flowers, I keep my air temperature more like 65 degrees. And I do that by just opening the door. No, I've never used a fan for anything. But in this building that I'm standing in, my grow room is right over there, and it faces southeast, and it has windows. And if I close that door, that room really heats up, which is what I do when I want it to be warm. But when I'm starting cool flower seeds, I tend to keep it cooler by just opening the door. But once those cool flowers, as right now, I have some in there that I'm growing, and I want them to vegetative grow, the top part of them, to, the plants have sprouted and they're growing, they can take it a little warmer, 70 to 75 degrees. So it just depends on what state, what you're doing in that room is the room temperature. What is your recommended method for weed control in new beds? So we tend to build our beds with weed prevention in mind. First off, we're talking annual beds. We don't really grow many. The only perennials I grow here are peonies, which is a permanent bed, right? And so all of our other beds are annuals, which means they get flipped a couple of times a year. And so when we prepare our beds, the number one thing I'm thinking of is how are we preventing weeds in this bed? And because I primarily always plant transplants, with the exception of a handful of cool flowers that prefer to be direct sown, which, let's see, I have 2 cool flower beds this year that are direct sown. They have things like bells of Ireland and poppies and nigella, just thinking through it, dill, Chinese forget-me-nots, larkspur, all of those things really do best direct sown. So those are in open beds, and I cultivate every week until they either gets cold enough that everything goes dormant. The rest of my beds are covered in biodegradable film, which you can find that on our website. And again, friends, our entire website and app store are 20% off all weekend. It is a perfect time to get Bio 360. The 6-packs, so let's say 20% off. It's $100 for 6 pieces, 50 feet long. Anyway, huge labor saver. So we prevent weeds by the way we build the beds for transplants, which means they're mulched, whether that means mulch film, which I use, or organic mulch, and then we plant through it. The problem with organic mulches, particularly during cool flower season, is you have to make the mulch deep enough to truly block light from getting to the soil surface, which is what makes, and there's as many weeds that grow in the winter, y'all, as there is in summer, if not more. You have to make the mulch deep enough that stops light penetration, or you're going to have a bunch of weeds. And then when the mulch is that deep, it's very easy to suffocate little transplants. That's why I love film. I mean, particularly for cool flowers. I use it in the winter, summertime too. But that's how we handle it. We hoe. You can find, and not to mention that's on sale too, y'all. The stand-up hoe, the garden, and the razor hoe. Couldn't live without those two tools. I've got the same ones I started with 20 years ago. Upright. Anyway, go watch the videos on the product. That's how I keep direct seeded stuff weed-free, and then the film prevents annuals from actually sprouting, getting that light. All right, I just finished top dressing my beds with compost and will be installing hoops and row covers, but I haven't started my seeds for cool flowers yet. 7A, New Jersey. Am I better off waiting till very early spring to start those seeds and transplant out? Yeah, so I don't forget where I was just talking about this. Y'all, I do so many lives. Between boot camp, the club, and this, I get very confused. So you're in 7A. You're probably pretty cold. Like we're going down to the 20s all next week. So we're finally like getting into winter, which means everything goes dormant. Nothing is going to be growing much, if at all, right? So my motto is for cool flowers, when you reach that point, which I expect you are being in New Jersey, is to say, yes, I am going to now just have my beds ready and waiting, which it sounds like you have, and then start your seeds to have nice sized transplants ready to go in the big garden 6 to 8 weeks before your last spring frost. And you know, there's a couple of seedlings that you could start even like before Christmas that they'd benefit from. The Rudbeckia family is super slow growing, huge. I grow 9 different Rudbeckias. That would be a good one to start earlier than the rest of them. But that's your first week of January's job, is to get all those very early spring things going. And yeah, then you'll be ready and waiting. What happens is if you plant late when it's cold outside, you're just sticking this little popsicle plant in the ground and it never grows roots and attaches. And then it goes dormant and it doesn't have a root to stand on. So you're better to wait, I think. I didn't used to tell people that, but now it's like you've missed your chance. The next chance is coming. Just be patient and get a great plan and make sure you have all your stuff lined up so you can do it. Do you have an update on the Tweedia seed? First off, I think it's on our stores. I know that I approved a label for it 2 weeks ago, I think. So if it's not there, it will be coming. And so I fall plant and very early spring plant Tweedia because it's in test mode here. Last year, the fall planted did okay, but it wasn't in the best spot. We really didn't give it any cover. You know, we really didn't treat it very well. We weren't very, very good hosts. So we've got it planted again out there. It is that and Billy Balls, which is a favorite. That's the only thing that's covered on my farm right now. Actually, we finished this. Suzanne and I are going out and to shoot video of me row covering the entire garden because we're going down into the 20s and the wind is already whipping. So the Tweedia, in my experience so far, Tweedia, if you haven't grown it, is powder blue. It is an amazing little flower. It does have an interesting fragrance. It's not overpowering, but it does have a smell. And we loved it. So the very early spring planted for us performed the best overall. So we're still in the testing mode. It takes 3 years to test anything, y'all. That's why, you know, again, I'll go down a rabbit hole. We have to go here and one more question. Most of us quit flower farming before we ever have the chance to succeed. It's just so interesting. And that's one of the reasons, so I don't know if y'all know, so I have a boot camp thing going on with my flower farming school students, trying to get people to engage in the content, to get smarter, to know better what to do, to keep them going longer. Because people, and it's not just flower farming, it's in everything, right? I mean, people quit in marriages, right? You just got to keep after it most often, right? So the boot camp is just really a way for me to help get people to engage. And I just can't even tell you, 3 years is a minimum of a test of anything. And surely for a business, surely, but most people quit before they get to the second year because they're doing most of the wrong stuff. Besides covering in the summer, what other techniques can I use to control grass growing in my beds? Well, it really depends on what grass it is. We have so many perennial weed grasses here in Virginia. I mean, Bermuda grass and crabgrass and, oh my goodness, just so many bad ones. And I don't have any magic bullets for that except out competing. That's why I will never be a full no-till farmer. I mean, the perennial weeds would overtake my farm. And tilling is not the best thing to do for that, but it helps to beat it back. It's the only thing we have found to use. So I do not have any answers for that. All right, friends. All right, so no more questions. And so friends, first off, happy Thanksgiving. I am so very, very grateful for each one of you all and all the attention that you give us. We just appreciate it so very, very much. And because of the whole team, on behalf of the whole team, and there's about 17 of us, we just love our jobs and we love getting up and doing what we do. And it's because of you folks that we get to do that. And we just appreciate y'all and just hope you are deep in being able to relax tomorrow and gobble till you wobble. That's what somebody said to me this week, and I thought that was so cute. So, friends, I will see you back. Now, remember, there is no show this Friday, right? Because we have a big Cyber Monday show. So the next show will be inside the app Monday at 12 noon. So no show on Friday. It'll be on Monday, giving the team the whole weekend off. And, forgetting what else. So the whole store and the app are on sale. And I just really appreciate you guys and have a happy holidays. And I'm sure I'll be popping on here again to talking about who knows what. So friends, until we meet again, ciao.